In this touching story, a kind waitress pays for a stranger's coffee, not realizing he's a billionaire searching for someone genuine. Comment below where you're watching from and stay till the end, because one small act changes everything. Now, let's dive into the story. The morning rush had settled into a dull hum at Morning Brew, a small cafe nestled on the corner of Maple and 9th Street. Outside, rain painted the city in muted shades of gray. It trickled down the windows, softening the skyline and creating a rhythmic patter that blended with the hiss of steamed milk and the soft clink of ceramic cups. The scent of espresso and damp pavement filled the air, a strangely comforting mix for the regulars who filtered in seeking warmth, caffeine, or simply a pause in the chaos of their lives. The bell above the cafe door jingled, drawing little attention at first, but the breeze that followed was sharp and cold, snapping patrons from their cozy conversations. A man stepped inside, his coat thin and soaked, the fabric clinging to his shoulders. His shoes, worn and patched, squeaked faintly with every step across the polished floor. He was older, maybe early 50s, with streaks of gray in his hair that clung to his forehead. His posture was slightly hunched, like someone who'd been carrying invisible weight for too long. No one recognized him. He didn't speak at first, just scanned the menu board like it held more meaning than it did. When he finally reached the counter, his voice was so quiet that the young man behind the register, Dylan, a barista with too much attitude and not enough patience, had to lean in. "Just a black coffee," the man said, his voice soft but steady. Dylan rang it up. "That'll be $2.75. The man reached into his coat, patting his pockets with growing urgency. Then again, and again. His face paled, lips parting slightly. I must have left my wallet at home," he stammered, visibly rattled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Could I maybe sit for a little while? Just until the rain eases?" Dylan rolled his eyes dramatically, then spoke loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "This isn't a waiting room. Man, you want a seat? You buy something. No money, no coffee, no table." The older man flinched as whispers began to ripple through the cafe. From a table nearby, a woman in a sleek trench coat laughed under her breath. "Unbelievable, walking into a place like this with no money. Maybe he thinks it's a soup kitchen." Another chimed in, barely hiding the contempt in his voice. The man's eyes dropped to the floor. He nodded once, quietly, and began to turn away. That's when she stepped in. Her name was Grace, 29, with chestnut hair pulled into a loose ponytail and an apron dusted with flour and coffee grounds. She wasn't supposed to be working the front that morning, but had come up from the back carrying a tray when she saw what was happening. She didn't speak right away, just walked up, set the tray down on the counter with a soft clatter, and slipped a $5 bill from her pocket. "I'll cover his coffee," she said, her voice steady and unshaken. Dylan looked stunned. "Grace, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what you should have," she said simply. Someone at a table near the window scoffed. "Wow, the waitress is playing hero now. What's next? Giving out muffins to the homeless?" Grace turned, eyes steady and voice clear. "Kindness isn't about who deserves it. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't look away." A hush fell. Even Dylan didn't have a comeback. She poured the man his coffee herself and set it gently on a saucer. "Here you go," she said softly, handing it to him like it was a gesture of dignity instead of charity. "Please, take a seat by the window. It's warmest there." He looked at her like she just handed him something more than a drink. Something he hadn't received in a very long time, respect. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Grace nodded and returned to her duties. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from quiet resolve. The mood in the cafe had shifted. The laughter was gone. The smirks had faded. In their place was silence, and a strange sense of discomfort in those who'd mocked, as if they'd been caught looking in a mirror. That shift lingered for the rest of her shift. Grace went about her work, refilling cups, wiping tables, ignoring the occasional whisper and side glance. No one approached her, no one apologized, but they all watched. And the man? He stayed until the rain eased. Then he stood, left the empty cup behind, and disappeared into the city. The next morning, Grace arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. The rain had cleared, leaving behind slick sidewalks and puddles that reflected the city's flickering neon signs. She let herself in through the back entrance, tied her apron around her waist, and got to work prepping the pastry case. Banana bread, blueberry muffins. She worked with a practiced rhythm, methodical, quiet, but she wasn't alone for long. "Grace," came a voice from the office door. It was her manager, Ron, stocky, balding, and perpetually carrying a mug of burnt coffee that smelled like day-old resentment. He didn't bother with greetings. "Step in here for a minute." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and followed him into the office. The door clicked shut behind her. "This isn't a soup kitchen," he said flatly. Grace tilted her head. "Excuse me? You gave that guy a free coffee yesterday. I paid for it, with my own money." Ron's expression didn't change. "That's not the point. You embarrassed your coworker. You created a scene." "I didn't create the scene," she said, voice still calm. "I stopped one." He sighed and set his mug down with a thud. "You're not here to make statements. You're here to serve customers who can actually pay." Grace folded her arms. "You mean people who look like they can pay?" Ron's nostrils flared. "Watch it, Grace. You're not irreplaceable." She nodded once. "Understood. Can I go now?" He stared at her for a long moment before waving her off. "Get back to work." She left the office without another word, heart pounding but head high. Back in the kitchen, Marcy and Finn were pretending to be busy. Marcy, red-haired and sharp-tongued, raised an eyebrow. "Manager give you a hero badge?" Finn smirked. "I mean, hey, maybe the guy was rich. You know how these stories go. Maybe you just landed yourself a sugar daddy." Grace didn't respond. She didn't roll her eyes. She just grabbed her tray and headed out to the floor. The whispers followed her. She could feel them, like wind brushing the back of her neck. But she didn't let them in. Because at home, there were real problems. Her younger sister, Lily, was waiting, half awake, curled up on their hand-me-down couch, coughing softly as she flipped through the static channels on their tiny TV. Their apartment was small, barely held together. One bedroom, peeling walls, a radiator that wheezed like an old man. Grace set a warm bowl of reheated porridge in front of her and pressed the back of her hand to Lily's forehead. "No fever today," she murmured. Lily smiled faintly. "Still feels like a truck hit me." "We'll get through it," Grace said. She always said that, even when she had $3 in her wallet and a subway token she couldn't afford to lose. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep, Grace sat at the window with a chipped mug of tea and watched the lights flicker in the distance. Her reflection looked back at her, tired and pale, but alive, strong, even if no one else saw it. She thought of the man from the cafe, the way he'd looked when Dylan snapped at him, like he wasn't a person, just a problem, and something deep inside her had flared up, a heat she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. She knew what it was like to be invisible. 15 years ago, her mother had collapsed in the middle of a farmer's market. People stepped around them like debris on a sidewalk. Only one person had stopped, an old woman in a patched skirt who knelt beside Grace, gave her a bottle of water, and held her hand until help came. Grace never saw that woman again, but she'd never forgotten her either. That moment had become a promise. So when she saw the man, soaked and trembling in the cafe, there wasn't a choice to be made. There was only the echo of a vow whispered to herself long ago. She sipped her tea and whispered aloud, just for herself, "I'd rather be mocked for kindness than praised for cruelty." And somehow, in the stillness of that moment, she felt free. The days that followed moved slowly. Grace noticed how the other staff avoided her eyes, how the regulars at table 4 stopped leaving tips, how Dylan made sure not to be near her during rush hour. But none of that really mattered. Then, on the 4th day, it happened. The bell above the door jingled, and a man stepped inside. He didn't look like he belonged there, not because he was homeless or shabby, but because he was too polished. Charcoal suit, silk scarf, leather shoes that tapped lightly as he walked. Grace didn't notice him right away. She was clearing plates near the back, but the hush that fell over the cafe tugged at her. She turned and froze. He made no move to order. He simply walked to the table by the window, the same one where a man once sat with a $5 coffee he hadn't been able to buy himself, and took a seat. Grace wiped her hands and approached with cautious steps, clutching a menu like a shield. "Can I get you something?" she asked, her voice quiet. The man looked up, same eyes. It was him. "I'm not here to order," he said gently. "I only have one question." She didn't respond. "Not yet. Why did you help me?" Grace's throat tightened. "Because I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. You didn't know who I was. I didn't need to. You had nothing to gain." She gave a small shrug. "You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small. I know that feeling." He nodded slowly, then gestured to the seat across from him. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" She hesitated, then slid into the seat. "My name is Nathan Hale," he said. "I run Hale International, mostly infrastructure, some philanthropy. You might have seen my name on a few buildings." Grace blinked. She hadn't. "I wasn't playing a game," he added quickly. "That day, I wasn't testing anyone. I just needed to see if decency still existed." She leaned back slightly, trying to wrap her mind around it all. "And you think I passed your test?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I think you reminded me that maybe there's still hope." The cafe noise faded to a dull hum. Outside, the rain had begun to fall again. Grace looked at him, truly looked at him, not the suit, not the name, but the man. And for the first time in days, she smiled, not for him, for herself. A few days had passed since their second conversation. Grace couldn't shake it from her mind, not the fact that Nathan Hale, one of the city's wealthiest and most elusive business figures, had sat across from her in that small downtown cafe, nor the sincerity in his voice when he said he wasn't testing her. That he had just wanted to see kindness, real and unprompted. She didn't tell anyone, not her sister, not her coworkers. The encounter felt too surreal, too intimate to share. So when a pale ivory envelope appeared in her mailbox that Friday evening, with no return address and her name written in elegant cursive, her stomach dropped. Inside was a formal invitation on thick cardstock, embossed with the emblem of the Westland, an exclusive luxury hotel that she'd only ever passed by on her walk to work, never daring to step inside. At the bottom of the card was a handwritten note. "Grace, I'd be honored if you'd meet me for tea. No expectations, just conversation. Warmly, Nathan." She stared at the card, her thumb brushing over the ink, wondering why her hands were trembling. The idea of stepping into that world, his world, was terrifying. What if she didn't fit in? What if she said something wrong? But she thought of her mother's words, the ones she still heard in quiet moments. "Don't let fear decide who you get to be." So she said yes. The Westland lobby smelled like fresh lilies and leather. The marble floors were polished so bright they mirrored every step, and chandeliers sparkled like constellations overhead. Grace felt entirely out of place. She'd worn her best, clean jeans, a borrowed blazer from Lily, and flats that had been buffed until they almost passed for new. Her hair was pinned back, and she wore the smallest pair of earrings she owned. At the concierge desk, she swallowed the lump in her throat and whispered, "I think I'm meeting someone here, Nathan Hale." The concierge smiled as if she'd been expecting her. "Of course, he's in the rooftop lounge. You can take the private elevator. 22nd floor. Private elevator?" As she rode up in silence, Grace kept her arms folded across her stomach, as if trying to hold herself together. The doors opened to reveal a space unlike anything she had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. A string quartet played softly in the corner. And near a window, seated alone at a small round table, was Nathan. He stood when he saw her, his smile easy, warm, disarming. "Grace," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." She took it, fingers trembling slightly. "This isn't exactly the cafe." He chuckled. "No, but the tea's not bad." They sat. The waiter arrived with a silver tray, chamomile for her, something darker for him. A small plate of delicate pastries rested between them. "I was worried you wouldn't come," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "Why not?" "Because I didn't want this to be weird." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "It doesn't have to be. I just wanted to talk. To thank you properly. I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." There was a pause. The tea steam curled between them. Then she asked, "Why were you there that day?" Why show up at a cafe dressed like someone barely scraping by? His gaze softened. 15 years ago, I lost my wife. Her name was Eleanor. She was the heart of everything I did. Grace didn't move, she just listened. After she passed, the world didn't feel the same. The people around me changed. Or maybe I changed. I stopped trusting kindness because it always came with strings. He looked out the window for a beat before continuing. So every year, I disappear for a few weeks. No driver, no suit, no wealth. I visit random places, sit in random cafes, just to watch, to feel something real again. Grace watched him closely. And this year, you were that something real? He met her eyes. Yes. She blinked hard. He continued. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't even flinch when people mocked you. You stood there, with $5 in your hand and all the dignity in the world. Grace looked down at her cup. Voice low. I just remembered someone who did the same for me once. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on the table. Tell me about her. She did. She told him about her mother collapsing at the market, about the stranger who helped them, and about the promise she made to always pay that kindness forward. I guess I've just always believed that if you can help someone, you should, even if no one sees it. Nathan's smile returned, smaller, quieter. That's what I've been searching for. Not charity, not pity, just people who still believe in grace. She raised an eyebrow. No pun intended? That made him laugh. None at all. They talked for another hour. About books, about cities, about the weight of being invisible and the fear of being seen too clearly. She asked about the world he lived in, and he never once made her feel small for not knowing it. When she finally stood to leave, he did too. Grace, he said gently, I'm not trying to recruit you or fix you or offer anything you don't want. But if you ever want to talk again, truly just talk, I'm here. She nodded, feeling something shift quietly inside her. I don't know what this is, she said, but it's something. Nathan smiled. That's enough. She left the Westland that night not with a job offer or some fantasy invitation, but with a conversation that felt more grounding than any paycheck she'd earned in years. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Unlike the last one, it bore no gold trimming or hotel crest. Just her name, Grace Ellison, written in black ink. Steady and precise. Inside, a folded piece of thick stationery and something she didn't expect. A round-trip train ticket to Montreal. The note was brief. Grace, I visit Montreal each spring. It's peaceful, slower, less noise, more space to breathe. I'd love for you to join me. No expectations, just conversation. Warmly, Nathan. Grace stared at the letter for a long time. Seated at the tiny kitchen table in their cramped apartment, Lily lay on the couch nearby, wrapped in 3 blankets and sipping cheap herbal tea. You've been staring at that paper for 15 minutes, Lily murmured, her voice scratchy from the cold. Grace folded the letter carefully and looked over. It's from him. Lily raised an eyebrow. The coffee guy? Grace gave her a flat look. He has a name. Nathan Hale. Oh, right. The man who owns half the skyline. Lily said with a weak chuckle. Grace rose, poured her sister another cup of tea, and sat beside her. He invited me to go to Montreal with him. Not for business, not for romance, I think. Just to talk, to share time. Lily looked at her for a long moment, then asked gently, Are you scared? Grace nodded, terrified. Because you don't trust him? No, Grace said honestly. Because I don't trust myself to belong in his world. Lily smiled faintly, pressing the warm cup to her lips. You've spent your whole life making space for everyone else. Grace, maybe it's time someone made space for you. Grace blinked back sudden tears. What if it's not real? Then you come back, but at least you'll know you walked through the door. 2 days later, Grace stood on the train platform as the sun rose over the tracks. Her breath fogging in the cool morning air. Her bag was small, just one change of clothes, a toothbrush, a notebook, and the tattered novel she'd been trying to finish for months. When the train arrived, sleek and humming with energy, she stepped on board with a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. Nathan was waiting in a private cabin. No security detail, no fanfare, just him, sitting by the window. a book in hand and 2 cups of coffee on the table between them. He looked up and smiled, not like a CEO greeting a guest, but like a friend who had been hoping she'd show up. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "I almost didn't," she replied, sitting across from him. He passed her the coffee. "So what changed your mind?" "I remembered," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "The world doesn't change unless you walk into it." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "That's what I hoped you'd say." Montreal in spring was like a painting just beginning to bloom. The air was brisk but not bitter, and the trees carried buds of promise along every branch. Nathan didn't take her to fancy restaurants or luxury hotels. Instead, they stayed in a modest guest house tucked between quiet streets, with creaky floors and mismatched furniture. They wandered through bookstores, drank hot cocoa from paper cups, and sat on old park benches watching people pass. No one recognized him. He didn't dress like the man from magazine covers or financial news channels. He wore flannel shirts and jeans, and spoke like a man who'd learned to measure time not in dollars but in moments. One evening, they visited a small shelter just outside the city, one he'd been quietly funding for years. Children ran to him, shouting his name, tugging at his coat, not because he bought them gifts, but because he remembered birthdays and favorite colors and inside jokes. Grace watched in silence, heart swelling with something she didn't know how to name. When they left, she asked quietly, "Why don't you ever tell people who you are?" Nathan shrugged, "Because when they know, they stop seeing me as a person. And I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to be a man who shows up." They spent their last night in Montreal in a small cabin near a lake. Firewood crackling in a cast iron stove. Grace sat wrapped in a wool blanket, sipping chamomile tea, while Nathan sketched something in a notebook. The silence between them was comfortable now. Then he spoke. "I've had people offer me everything," he said softly. "Love, success, applause. But I don't need someone to be impressed by me." He looked over at her, eyes gentle. "I need someone who sees me when I'm not trying to be seen." Grace didn't answer at first. She let the words hang in the air. Then she whispered, "I don't know if I'm that person." Nathan didn't flinch. "You don't have to be. But you already are. You just don't know it yet." She blinked, tears stinging. "Why me?" "Because when no one else would look, you did. You saw a man soaked and ashamed. And you offered kindness. Not because of who I was, but because of who you are." Grace stood then, walked to the window, and stared out at the moonlit lake. "I've never felt more like myself than I do right now," she said quietly. Nathan didn't respond. He didn't have to. They didn't hold hands. They didn't kiss. But something deeper passed between them. Recognition, peace, a mutual understanding that the heart sees long before the eyes do. When they returned to the city, Grace felt different, not bigger, not smaller, just more herself. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of a community center Nathan had helped renovate, he handed her a simple folder. "What's this?" she asked, flipping it open. Inside were the documents to start a foundation, not in his name, but in hers. The Grace Ellison Fund. It would support women coming out of poverty, homelessness, or caregiving roles, women like her. "I don't need it to be mine," he said. "I want it to exist because you do." Grace stared down at the papers. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know you matter." She closed the folder slowly, then looked at him with eyes that shimmered with gratitude and resolve. "I want to build something too," she said, "but not in my name. And not with your money. I want to start small. Real, honest." Nathan nodded. "That's what I hoped you'd say." And for the first time in years, Grace believed she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning. It was a soft, gray morning when Grace stood across the street from the newly opened cafe. A light drizzle fell from the sky, dotting her umbrella, mirroring the raindrops that once blurred the windows of the place where everything began. The old cafe was gone now, its lease long ended, but in its place stood a new space, hers. The letters on the glass read, "The First Cup." Below it, etched in simple script, "No one should have to earn kindness." Grace took a long breath as the light inside the cafe flickered on, casting a warm glow through the windows. She wasn't just opening a business. She was honoring a moment, a promise. A version of herself that had once believed $5 and a little courage weren't enough to change anything. The walls inside were painted a warm cream. The wooden floors refinished by volunteers. The furniture a mix of vintage and handmade. A small upright piano sat in the corner waiting for weekend musicians. On the far wall, bookshelves reached halfway to the ceiling, free to borrow. No return date needed, but what caught every eye first was the chalkboard menu. There were no prices, just a message: your first cup is on us. If you'd like, your second is on someone else. It was a system based on trust. Grace had no business degree, no staff with formal training, just a rotating team of kind-hearted workers, some paid, some volunteers, and a belief that people were better than the world often assumed. And they came. Mothers with toddlers in strollers, delivery drivers taking a moment of rest, lonely elders who only wanted to be greeted by name, nurses off night shifts, students studying for exams, and every now and then, someone who needed nothing but a seat by the window and a break from the rain. That day, Grace stood just inside the door, mug in hand, as the cafe filled with its first guests. The scent of cinnamon buns and roasted beans danced in the air. Laughter, light music, the clatter of cups. Then the door opened. An older man stepped in, soaked from the drizzle, his coat worn, his face tired, his shoulders hunched slightly as he hesitated by the entrance, scanning the room as if unsure whether he belonged. One of the new baristas, a kind kid named Leo, stepped forward. Excuse me, sir. This cafe is, well, it's for customers only, if you don't." But before Leo could finish, Grace moved. She crossed the room, gently laid a hand on his shoulder, and spoke with a soft smile. "It's okay, Leo." Then she turned to the man. "Would you like a seat by the window?" The man looked surprised, then nodded. Grace smiled and gestured. "We've got chamomile, bold roast, and ginger honey today. What would you like?" "Just something warm," he murmured, "and somewhere to sit. It's been a long morning." She guided him to the same seat Nathan once sat in, the one that faced the city, where the rain painted soft lines on the glass. Grace returned to the counter and poured the coffee herself. She brought it to him with a folded napkin and a soft word. "Here at the first cup. No questions, no shame, just rest." The man blinked, swallowed hard, and managed a quiet, "Thank you." Leo, now behind the counter, glanced at Grace, humbled. She gave him a nod. He'd learn. They all would. Grace stepped back and looked out the window, and there he was. Nathan, across the street, dressed in a charcoal coat, umbrella in hand, watching. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood for a moment, eyes meeting hers through the soft veil of rain. And then, slowly, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the city like a whisper. She watched until he was gone, and then she turned back to the room that now belonged to more than just her. Later that evening, during the soft opening, Grace stood beside the piano with a microphone in one hand and a warm cup of coffee in the other. The room had quieted. Every seat was filled. People sat shoulder to shoulder. Strangers no longer. She cleared her throat, then began. "Years ago, I paid for someone's coffee." A quiet murmur of recognition stirred. "I didn't know who he was. I just saw someone wet from the rain, being made small in a place where kindness should have been the easiest thing to offer. I had $5 to spare, and so I gave it." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "That cup cost me a shift's tip, but what it gave me was a new way to see the world." More than one person wiped at their eyes. "I thought I was helping someone who was lost," she continued, "but it turns out, he helped me find a version of myself I didn't know I was allowed to become." She placed the cup on the piano and stepped back, her voice soft but unwavering. "This cafe isn't about selling coffee. It's about presence, about showing up when no one else does. A man once told me, kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be continued." She smiled. "So that's what we're doing here. One cup at a time." She took a breath, looked around, and almost as an afterthought added, "Some loves don't need romance. Some lives change with nothing more than a kind gesture, and the courage to mean it." Applause rose, soft at first, then louder, warmer. The saxophone in the corner began to play. A child laughed near the bookshelf. And in the back of the room, The barista poured a first cup, for someone who didn't know they needed it until they did. Grace walked to the counter and rested her hands on the wood she had sanded herself. She watched the cafe hum with life and knew, in the deepest part of her, that this was the legacy. Not the building, not the coffee, but the ripple. Because kindness, once given without condition, echoes further than we ever realize. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change not just one life, but 2. Or 3. Or more. One first cup at a time. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below. If you found this story inspiring, please like, subscribe to Tellinight, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next heartfelt story. We'll see you in the next one.